Reduce, reuse, recycle. The environmentally sustainable protocol for any forms of human consumption. In an ideal world, the humanity understands the problem of plastic waste, and everyone only uses plastics when absolutely needed. Then, the use of plastic is reduced to the absolute minimum, and any plastics that were used were reused, or if not, recycled. Hence, no plastic waste is made and the plastic waste problem goes away and people lived happily ever after. This is called an ideal world for a reason. We live in a plastic society. It is one of the few things that we can say about for all humanity. Everyone uses plastics in our daily life, one form or another, regardless of race or social hierarchies. The packaging wrappers, the bottles of shampoos, the clothes you wear, and etc. etc. Plastics is one of the greatest human inventions, and there is no way to argue about it. In fact, it is too good that it causes a huge problem for the natural environment. As many of you might already know, plastics cannot be degraded in the nature, or to be more specific, it takes a long period of time for plastics to decompose in the nature. But even then, plastics don't actually fully decompose. This is all because of how great plastics were designed and made. Plastic waste have been a growing problem for a very long time, and there are actually a lot of efforts that are made in order to reduce the amount of plastic waste. One day I stumbled across this documentary talking about how plastic bottles are turned into clothing. It is fascinating to see how much technology has advanced, to see being able to recycle plastics and give them a second life. The documentary covers many essential aspects of plastic recycling, from the upside of recycling plastics to the downside and the challenges for recycling. The upside is, of course, being able to recycle existing plastics and turning them into something that can be used again, and in this case it was made into clothing. The downside is, however, that recycling plastics is resource intensive. I find one of the most notable things from the documentary is that there is a huge amount of water being used during the process of recycling. And microplastics are polluted in the water during the recycling process. Microplastics in water is a whole nother set of problems that I won't be touching on in this video, but in short, microplastics flows into the water and that water is put back into the natural water system. The environment will be polluted with these tiny little pieces of plastics. Not only is it bad for the environment and wildlife, people are also affected as microplastics are essentially flowing into our drinking water. Anyways, back to recycling. Recycling plastic bottles requires multi-layer processes, and overall requires much more resources than just using new raw materials to make whatever the plastic products that companies are trying to produce. Requiring more resources means higher costs for manufacturing. This is often the case when it comes to recycling any materials, especially when it comes to developed countries where labors are essentially more expensive. Therefore, using recycling materials for manufacturing is not mainstream in big companies and corporations, as using recycled materials is not the most economically viable option. In my opinion, recycling materials like plastics comes from the good of the people, at least to a certain degree, because from the economic perspective, recycling materials is extremely unlikely to maximize profit due to the difference in the cost between the new materials and the recycled materials. Of course, this is not saying that there is no market or no profit from recycling. Otherwise, none of these recycling facilities and companies would exist in the first place. Recycling plastics and making them into new products must have some form of intent to reduce plastic waste. At least this is my optimistic view on the recycling. So what exactly are the challenges for recycling? Economic is a huge factor. If not, it is the biggest challenge when it comes to recycling. The process of recycling costs too much money and resources that it is always the best to use existing raw materials for the best economic interest. Since private companies are not charities or government organizations, economic interest will always be the top priority. And that is one of the major challenges when it comes to large-scale recycling process. There are not enough company interests for recycling. Technologies and knowledge, on the other hand, do not seem to be the issue. It is really fascinating when you see how much technology have advanced in the modern days. Almost feels like there is always a technology that is a solution to any kind of problem. But why is it that when humans have the technologies to solve any problem, yet there are still so many problems out there in this world? This all comes down to the practicality and the economic viability. These two reasons are interconnected and they cannot be separated one way or the other. Practicality refers to the possibility to put the technology into practice. Does it make sense to use this technology? Can the technology be used in the industrial scale? What is the productivity and the cost of technology? How can people keep the technology running? And all sorts of aspects from the physical operation of the technology. Economic viability refers to how much money it will cost to run this technology. Will the technology be able to reach a breaking point or generate revenue? Can a company operate this technology without going bankrupt? And at the end of the day, something has to cover up the cost of running the technology. Therefore, even though we have the technologies and the knowledge for recycling, putting them into practice is the biggest challenge. Most of them come from economic perspectives as it costs money to put technologies running. And money doesn't just appear out of nowhere. And apparently in this case of plastic bottle recycling, the company has been really successful in both aspects. So then what can we do? As an average individual like you and I, there is once again nothing really much that we can do about the plastic waste. Especially in places like Canada and the US, where recycling has always been a mysterious and questionable effort. Different regions have different recycling rules. Some items can be put into the recycling bins in some area, but not the other. And even if you put all the recyclable materials into the recycling bins, the majority of them still goes into landfills rather than being recycled. The issue of general waste in North America has been problematic for a really long time, and it seems like not many people care about it. I believe that part of this is due to the culture, where recycling and sorting waste is never really treated seriously among the general North American. Regardless, even if individuals want to reduce plastic waste, most of the things that we buy and use on a daily basis comes with some form of plastics. For instance, hygiene products like shampoo, food packaging from the grocery stores, or cleaning products like dish soap or detergents. There is no alternative from buying these kind of products plastic-free in most places in North America. But avoiding buying daily essentials is really inevitable unless you want to sacrifice the quality of life. It is why the saying that reduce, reuse, and recycle has reduced as the first priority for consumption. Reducing the consumption of anything translates to not generating any waste from the consumption. The very best thing that we can do to reduce the consumption of unnecessary items, like buying the 100th shirt that you will never wear. If everyone stops buying their 100th shirt, companies theoretically would decrease the number of shirts production because they can't sell that many shirts, and therefore reduce the consumption of materials as well as the waste that would be generated after people don't want their 100th shirt anymore. This is of course once again a lot easier said than done. From what I can see in the modern society, it is almost impossible to convince others to stop buying the unnecessary things, especially to the people who already have the habits of buying. So despite the idea of reduce and reuse, I believe that we should really focus on how to improve the recycling system. When people consume, some amount of waste will be made inevitably. And if wastes are inevitable, we should become experts at dealing with the waste and turn them into something usable again. And that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Peace.